This is Professor Selby. Thanks for joining me for a few brief videos that will describe some free legal resources that may get you quite a bit of mileage for legal research. I'm going to start with Google resources. The reason I'm starting here is because there are a number of things that Google offers that actually come in really handy for legal research resources, even beyond the alerts I've already showed you how to set up when you're doing a Google Scholar search. Let's start with the basics. If you want to see what Google has to offer, click on the app launcher, and then go down to More, and then go to Even More. Google is always working on something interesting, so beyond basic web searching and maps that you may be already familiar with, you can look at interesting information for business and media, geographic materials, some specialized searches. These are pretty interesting. If you end up working in a patent search firm, you can actually do patent searches through Google. Patent searches are also available through Google Scholar. The finance section actually has interesting business news and interactive charts. Bloomberg Law is really good for business news, but in practice, Bloomberg Law is going to cost you some money. So the finance section in Google actually does some really interesting things. Google Scholar, we have already discussed. For home and office, while you're in law school, you actually have access to Microsoft Word and the entire suite of Microsoft Office free of charge. Google offers some open access versions of those resources. Sheets, it's the same as Excel. Well, not quite the same, but you get the point. Docs, slides, drawing. The Google Calendar is incredible. I encourage you, if you aren't already calendaring in an electronic format, to give it a try. The reason I say that is because you can actually schedule in appointments with other people who also use the calendar and set reminders for yourself. I live and die by my Outlook calendar, and I have all of my birthday reminders in my Google Calendar. The other thing I would encourage you to take a look at is Google Forms. This isn't something I necessarily expect you to use for legal research, but I use Google Forms all the time to do brief surveys of my colleagues. So it's one of the things that actually comes in really handy in a professional setting. All right, and the innovation section, if you happen to be a coder, is quite interesting. All right, those are the basics, but what I want to look at now is Google Books. So I'm going to go back up to the specialized searches, actually into media. I'm going to click on books. What I'm doing is searching the full text of books. Not all of these books actually provide the full text to the reader. What they can do, though, is give you a little bit of information about whether or not you want to pursue actually getting the book itself. The other nice thing is that a lot of Google Books have something called snippets, small sections of text. Those small sections of text may get you everything you need, and you don't have to go any further. Let's start. Since we've been talking about craft beer law, I'm going to see if there's anything from the Brewers Association. All right, so I see quite a few things. I want to use some search tools to narrow it down. I want books with a preview available, and I want books that happen to be published within the last few years. The first thing I see here is the Brewers Association Guide to Starting Your Own Brewery. This clearly isn't geared toward attorneys, but what it does provide is some pretty interesting information, not just about the mechanics and the trade of brewing, but the things that a brewer should consider when looking into going into business. This is the kind of trade information that can be really valuable to somebody who represents clients doing this work. If you scroll down a bit, you'll see that there's actually a good sense of what's in the book. There's the table of contents again. I'm pretty excited about the table of contents. And then you'll see there's actually a section on legal and regulatory material. Let's take a look at another aspect of the brewing industry that I've discussed with you a little bit, trademark. So I'm going to look to see if there's anything on trade secrecy. And I'll start by searching that, and then I'm going to narrow my search down. Actually, I'm not. I see something right here that looks like it might be useful for me. The law and theory of trade secrecy. This looks like a pretty darn good book. If you scroll down a bit, you can see that it was published in 2011, which means the resources in this are probably going to need some attention and updating. But that said, it looks like there's a pretty good sense of what trade secrets are and how they function. If you want to take a look at the information you can see from this book without purchasing it or interlibrary loaning it, take a look at the drop-down menu here under front cover. In fact, take a look at the restatements, the Uniform Act, and the status of American trade secret law. The restatements are a uniquely authoritative secondary source, and we haven't spent any time on them in class, but I would encourage you to get familiar with the restatements. They are an invaluable source of secondary authority. Finally, let's look at one other book that's available through Google Books. At least a good portion of it is. We know that trade secrets are only one aspect of the intellectual property that can be found in this particular industry. So let's look more broadly at intellectual property. I'm going to look at intellectual property in business. All right, there's an intellectual property desk book for business lawyers, but it appears that that was published in 2007. That's a little too old for me, so I'm going to use my search tools. I'm going to look at only intellectual property books that were published in the last 5 years. Intellectual Property in Business Transactions was published in 2014. It's one of the books that I looked at in preparing for this part of the lecture. This is a fantastic book and actually would be a wonderful resource for you. One of the things that I find most interesting is that you're looking at intellectual property and due diligence. This gives you information about the work that the business has to do, or the business's attorney has to do, in terms of not only protecting but maintaining intellectual property. We've done all this free of charge. And if you find that there's a book that has snippets that are very valuable to you, you can go forward with either interlibrary loaning the book or purchasing it for yourself. Next up, we'll talk about Google Scholar and looking for articles and cases. This one will be very brief, as we've already looked at some of this.